Hi, good morning, everybody. I want to hear some loud good morning, please. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Thank you. So my name is Hardik Mistry. I work as a freelance consultant. Today I'm going to walk you through with the concept of HADR. How many of you are working professionals? Most of you. Great. How many of you use Azure in your everyday work? In one way or another. It might be just setting user permissions, that's okay. But you know what Azure is at a high level. You have basic idea, right? Okay. So, and how many use Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, basically anything digital, right? We all are in digital age. We all want to make sure that apps and services are always available. If you are not able to send 10 rupees to the auto wala, there is a panic situation. Bhaiya cash nahi hai. It happens, yes or no?
Yes.
When you book a cab, you want the cab to be available as soon as possible, right? When you tweet, you want the tweet to appear as soon as possible. And these days, we have this concept of 10-minute delivery. Even to order bread and milk, we are clicking buttons these days. Such lazy people. Yes or no? But it's a fact of life. I hope you agree. Yes or no? Right? Now, what I'm trying to say, or why am I giving this as an example, is because we may or may not like it, but we want to make sure that all these apps and services are always available. Has it ever happened to you that you open Facebook or any other service, let's say Zomato or something, midnight, and then they'll say, oh, sorry, app not available, service not available. Yes, they will tell you if the service partner is not available because there's no one there to deliver. But the app, the product itself is still online. I hope you agree. Yes or no? Do they take holidays? Do they shut down their apps or businesses in Diwali or in any so-and-so festival? No. You can order from Amazon even at 3 o'clock in the night versus 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Yes or no? And any product, irrespective of the value. So there is no conditions on what the product will do. It is basically there to serve you 24/7, 365 days. You ask it and it will do it. And that's why you want to use that product again and again. Right? It's not that you have your friends invested in Zomato and that's why you're ordering from Zomato. It's the fact that it's convenient, you click a button, you get your food delivered and you're happy. It's not that you have somebody coming from Amazon with a referral code or something, that's why you're ordering from Amazon. It's basically the idea is because you're hooked up to the system that, okay, I want something, I'll order, I get the job done, I pay for it, service is okay, right? So have you imagined what goes in putting these services always available? There is a lot of work done by a lot of people to make sure that when an order comes versus when somebody opens a web page or opens an app, the content, the information is always displayed in time, accurately, and so on and so on. There are many metrics, right? And of course, payments also should work, right? How many of you know about Flipkart's Big Billion Days sale? But how many of you particularly know about the fiasco that happened when they launched Big Billion Day sales for the first time a few years ago? So when Flipkart was pretty new, they introduced the idea of a sale online, pretty new. They already had a lot of users, right? It was around Diwali. They thought it's great to, give out a sale, and what happened is, for any reason, there was so much traffic on their website and app that they were not able to process orders or do things correctly. For example, my own personal experience, I tried to order a TV. So in the product, I search for a TV, the one I wanted. I say add to cart. I go to cart. It's the same TV that I ordered, right? But the value changed to something for an iPhone. Right? So something went wrong with the order service. Yes or no? It kind of messed up the session. The data interchanged. Something happened. I don't know what happened, but I'm just trying to give you an example. So many people were not able to place orders. Many people were not able to make the payment for the order. Hence, their orders were not placed. Hence, and the products were sold out in a fraction of minutes. So then there was a lot of disappointment. मेरी चीज चली गई. Yes or no? There is a lot of frustration when that happens, right? So what happens is that when that happens to you as a user, you don't like going to the same service again. I hope you follow what I'm trying to say, right? So at the end of the whole ecosystem, if you are one of those people who is responsible to make those services available always, you have to look into, let's say, two things. HADR. HADR, two different words, but they are commonly talked together. So, for example, the next slide talks about what I just represented. So what happens is, if you're not very careful about making your services available, what happens is your customer retention goes down, right? For example, with Flipkart, at least in those days or following months after that fiasco, and again, I'm using that because that actually happened, so I'm not trying to, of course, blame the service, but the point is, it happens with all of us, in early days at least, right? So it definitely impacts how many visitors or users will come again to your product or your platform, right? So obviously that means your retention will be affected. It will definitely affect your business. Why? Because less the users ordering from your platform, loss in business, loss in value, right? And then the worst fear of any SaaS or software company. How many of you have faced challenges or issues after going live? How many of you have experience of going live? Right? And we all faced one problem in the past, right? It works on my PC. मेरे कंप्यूटर पे तो चल रहा है, सर्वर पे मुझे नहीं पता. We literally go with that emotion, right? When somebody comes up to you and says, hey, this is not working, hey, login is not working, whatever. Normally you'll be like, hey, password check karo, etc. etc. Then still they'll keep telling you it's not working. Then it turns out that the connection to the SQL server was wrong. You deployed to UAT, but it was still pointing to dev. So there is no account available with that email, right? So hence it will not. But you get the idea, right? But those are silly software human errors. But I'm still talking about a bit more problems at a higher scale. So definitely, more or less, it affects your services. So again, business as well as customers are not happy. So what is HADR? So as I was mentioning, that these are two words: high availability and disaster recovery. So in today's demo, as well as the examples that I'll be sharing you will be focused primarily on HA, high availability of the services. For DR, I'll give you a quick demo and try to explain you how you can take advantage of services that are on Azure. Okay. Now, obviously you can read that high availability, obviously as the word suggests, it is something that you will have to do to make sure that your components or services are always available. They're always online, right? And by online, it may not apply to just a client-facing website or an app. This system should be available internally as well. For example, imagine there is an inventory system, order system. For example, when an order comes in, you might have to check with inventory if there is insufficient inventory in stock or not. So those are back office operations, right? That is not visible to the customer, but your system has to do some due diligence. So there are a lot of software pieces that also have to operate in sync and make sure that everything goes fine, right? So for those services also, you have to make sure that it's always available. Disaster recovery, as the word applies, disaster and recovery from the disaster. For example, even though we use Azure or any other competitor services, they are in the cloud, but they are not literally cloud. They are physically sitting somewhere, right? There are humans operating on it, maintaining them, and things like that. So they are obviously affected by natural disasters or human errors or any other issues which might be there due to electronic issues. Let's say network outage, a poor switch, improper hard drive got crashed. There could be 10 reasons why your machine is or your service is affected, right? So then there are some common strategies that you have to follow, for example, policies or some kind of actions that you have to take in order to make sure that everything is back to normal within as less amount of time as possible, right? So why is it important? Some key points. You want to make sure that it's always available. So again, in the example of any service or an app, if it goes offline, you're not happy. So you want to make sure that it's always available for your users, right? You want to make sure that your customers are satisfied. For example, if I stop you from making an order successfully, if I tell you, hey, sorry, your card is not approved, or hey, your transaction is invalid, you're not going to be angry at Amazon or that service, because you kind of understand, okay, something's wrong with my bank. But if I simply tell you, sorry, your order cancelled, without giving you the context, as a user, you're unhappy, right? So the important part is, if I will not have right processes in place, how will I tell you what failed? I cannot generalize your errors, right? I have to be very specific, what is the problem, right? So that you can act on them as a user. And reduce the churn rate. What is a churn rate? Any idea?
RPN RTO?
Sorry?
RPN RTO?
It's the measure
Because it's
unit,
SLI,
but
SLOs.
sorry, not really. More or less correlated, but not really.
Then no, it's business. It's not technical term.
I'm sorry. So
Customers visiting your platform.
go ahead. Yes.
Customers visiting your platform, the experience is bad, then
They stop coming again.
yeah, they stop coming.
So if the churn rate goes, if the churn rate goes higher in the sense less visitors are using your system. So higher the churn rate, it's bad for business. Lower the churn rate, it's good for business. It's inverse. Are you able to understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So just for laughs, a small meme. Many of you may relate to this. Yes or no? All of you have seen this meme, yes or no? Quite popular. So I thought this is a good meme to show, like a bit unbiased, does not probably hurt anybody, right? So this is the fact with all of us. Yes or no? So what happens is that you will definitely say it's working for me, but then when it's deployed at the customer side, something's not working, and then you're laughing back at your sales team. It was working for me, so you deal with it now. It's because it's a service problem now, right? So ultimately the fact is someone has to take care of these things. These things cannot act on themselves. For example, even if we talk about AI or anything in today's generation, they are not competent themselves. Do you follow what I'm trying to say? Someone has to make them competent. And then of course they can repeat themselves or learn themselves, as we call it in machine learning. But again, someone is making them competent. It might be data collected from this many years by some company, and then they are using that as a data set. And of course, I understand it's not exactly human who is making it competent, but ultimately it's derived from humans. Do you agree or not?
Yes.
Right? Okay. So what this shows you is, again, some of you may relate to this, some of you may not relate to this, because some of you may not have used Azure. What this shows us is a typical or an ideal architecture. Now when I say ideal, this is not the only architecture. There are many ways of putting the services together. What this shows right now is a typical web app experience, a website experience. Say for example, there is a server which is responsible to serve content, but then to achieve SLA, SLA stands for service level agreements. Some of you might have heard that word in your So service level agreement is nothing but they guarantee or assure you that they will provide you XYZ service for a certain amount of time. For example, your electricity board, they have an SLA that if there is an outage in your area, they should ideally try to fix, or they will try to fix the outage of electricity within, let's say, 5 hours or less. It's not given to you in writing, but I hope you understand the concept. So there is always a level of SLA across industries, not just with cloud, right? So what this architecture represents is, hey, to make sure that if your machine goes down or if your service is affected on Azure, there is always a backup or a secondary copy. So what you see, of course, it may not be very clearly visible. I try to zoom in. Yeah, maybe better now. So what you see here is, on the extreme left, you can notice it says internet. There is a component called front door. them. There are many options, but this is because of a diagram I'm using. So then there is a service that takes your request, and then the service decides which region is available. So for example, in the diagram itself, you can notice a label which says active region. So it indicates that, hey, this is the region which is responsible to serve requests. But there can be also a secondary region, or they call it as a standby region. Why standby? Because it's not responsible to serve the request 24/7 or always. It is configured in such a way that if in case something happens to the primary region, it can take over. The services can automatically take over from the secondary region or the standby region. Pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
दो copy है, right? So if one copy is lost, you have a backup on your pen drive, right? Yes or no? Normally people have done that backup thing manually. Yes or no? Then what people also, I've seen people doing is that they will keep copy of C drive in D drive, but on the same laptop. And then they'll say it's my backup. Well, it's back in school and college days, you know, when people were not really aware about what backup means, right? They just wanted to have a copy.
You see the CD invent word.
Yeah. So ultimately, the fact is that these two, and importantly, you should pay attention to the word region. This needs to be set up in such a way that they both operate in separate regions. And by region, I literally mean physically separate. Ideally not the same region physically, maybe separate somewhere else, so that if in case an entire region is affected, it is always available from a secondary region.
Hardik just mentioned what is an Azure region.
Yeah. So I'll be talking about that when I'm doing the demo, because I also have a pre-configured demo for them to experience, and they can also experience from their laptop, so they'll be excited about it. Yeah. So one of the key factors for you as a IT person, how many of you are software engineers, meaning people who are writing code? Anybody who is an IT person responsible to maintain, manage servers? Okay, I see some people, right? Now the reason I'm asking this is not to tell each other who is good or bad, right? The idea is that for both the parties, it's a big question or a challenge that, hey, as I was saying, it works on my PC problem, right? So as a developer, you'll be like, website chal raha hai, right? But what happens is, if it is working on your laptop, you assume that it will work on server when it's deployed. But that's not the case always, yes or no? So how will we know what's the problem? And then you have to probably invest in tools or techniques for monitoring. We also call it as observability, right? These are nothing but common tools. They are available both paid and free. And depending upon your comfort, you can choose a tool both built in Azure, or there are many tools out in the market from third-party services as well. So the idea is that you have to find out what is affecting your app, right? That's the first thing. For example, you might have been told by your team leader that, hey, this particular request is taking too long. This database operation is too slow, XYZ. But they may not have concrete answers. A common strategy many people apply is they simply scale up. Basically, they are running on, let's say, 8 GB server. Just because somebody agreed that, okay, making it 16 GB server will make it faster. But that's a common strategy people adopt. Why? Because they want to make sure business continues. So they'll be like, okay, अभी के लिए scale कर दो, बाद में देखेंगे कहाँ problem आ रहा है या क्यों problem आ रहा है, and then we'll figure out, is it a high memory problem or is it a query problem, right? It's a mixed bag of different issues, right? So monitoring your services is very important, right? So what I've written out here is some basic key points, that what you have to do is understand how your services work, how your monitoring should be set up. So for example, the first line I'm saying, talking about setting up alerts. What happens is, once the services are deployed, or once they are on the cloud, it may be a dev environment used only by developers to test, or acceptance environment just for your stakeholders to test. Meaning, even if it's not a production environment, you have to set up monitoring. Why? Because if something is wrong, you can catch those problems before somebody comes and complains to you. I hope you understand, right? So you have to set up monitoring, you have to set up alerts. So all providers, including Azure, they allow you to set alerts, and by alerts I literally mean you will get SMS or email detailing out what the problem is. Let's say if its CPU is too high, memory is too high, too low, whatever, depends on how you want to tune it. And we will do a demo and you'll hopefully enjoy that as well. And importantly, you have to, as I was mentioning, you have to set up your dev or acceptance with robust monitoring. But a general tip is, what I've noticed across my experiences, if you set up these tools on a production app, because with production you have too many customers or requests processing together, right? You might experience some kind of bottlenecks. For example, you will notice that on your production servers, your memory consumption is too high, right? It may not be that high on UAT or acceptance. Why? Because you are running these services, but at the same time, actual customers are using your services, right? So I recommend customers not to set up monitoring, if possible, on production, except error logging. So if a failure occurs, you want to know what is failing. But you may not be interested in how much memory consumption is happening. That can be done manually by a IT administrator also. They can go open a resource, I'll show you what to do. And they can check, okay, currently the memory graph is this much, or CPU graph is this much. It can be still done, right? So I recommend such options. Now, to make your services, always available or highly available, with Azure, what you want to make sure is that depending upon what you're serving as traffic, for example, how many of you have developed websites and have experience of hosting a website on a server? It may not be Azure, but anywhere. How many of you have experience hosting a website? How many of you have experience building a website? That's okay, it's a website, right? See, we are not talking about the what framework, it's just a website, right? So as you can read right now, if you're serving HTTP traffic, of course it also applies for HTTPS. So the word is HTTP does not mean that it does not apply to HTTPS. So if it's HTTP traffic, you have a particular choice. Let's say Azure Front Door, that's the name of one of the services, right? If you are serving traffic on other protocols, let's say TCP or UDP, you might want to consider using something called as Traffic Manager. These are the name of two services, right? So this slide is just covering the basic outline. I'll be doing a demo and then you'll probably get a better understanding of what I'm saying, okay? So what this means is that with Traffic Manager, as the name applies, it's a DNS level routing mechanism or a load balancer. What happens, you send a request, it will decide which service is available or not available, and accordingly route the traffic on its own, right? But with Front Door, what it does is that it also gives you the ability to set custom redirect rules. By rules, what I mean is, for example, I would not say proxy, but
in the headers, HTTP headers, you may have something. ये region पे ये है तो
yeah. So for example, let's say if you are visiting from India, you can configure the service such a way that the traffic will be redirected to India region. But if you are, let's say, yeah. But then there are more advanced logics as well possible. For example, depending upon the service header or settings.
Geolocation.
Right. Not just geolocation, but let's say you might say that if a request comes via app, then redirect it to a backend server, let's say as a separate instance.
Mm-hmm.
It might be in India only. But if the request is coming from a admin portal or a CRM, which is managed by admin, it does not need a lot of throughput, does not need a lot of requests. So that might be served from a different region or different instance, for example. Now, this diagram, it kind of gives you a highlight on what options to use when. So what I'll do is I'll not literally go through all of that. Once you receive the slides, you can also go through, and of course there are some links that I've put in my slides which you can visit, and of course it will take you to the official Azure documentation. Okay. Now, what this slide talks about is, so in Azure there are many ways you can host your service or your app in general. In today's demo we are going to talk about a web app, a simple website, right? So say for example, if you are hosting a website or an API or anything which is web, basically. You can, one option is you can host it as service in a virtual machine, or two, you can host it as something called as an app service, right? You can also host it as a container, right? But more or less it's an app service. Even if you host it as a container, it also treats as an app service, basically, right? So the idea is that what you want to make sure is that if you are hosting on a VM, virtual machine, or an app service, you want to basically set up something called as autoscale. Autoscale, as the word suggests, it allows you to set in some rules. Let's say, hey, if my memory usage is this much, or etc., it will automatically add or scale up or scale down. It depends. So if your demand is more, let's say weekend, and if you have more orders, more visitors on your website, obviously your throughput demand will increase, right? So if your settings are set accordingly, it will automatically add more servers until it is able to serve the capacity. Once it cools down in the sense, let's say now it's Monday, their visitors are less, not too much traffic, the service will automatically also tune down or scale down itself to, let's say, just one instance or two instances, depending upon your setting, which I'll be showing you in the demo. So these are some common tips, which again I'll be talking about in the demo. So I'll just move on to the next slide. This slide talks about putting up the resilient service options for SQL Azure, or SQL Server, as we might call it. It's not that Azure can only host MS SQL or Microsoft SQL. It can host any kind of database engine you want, depending upon your configuration. But the idea is that if you're hosting currently your SQL services in a virtual machine, for example, from personal experience, I would recommend you to consider moving to a Azure SQL. Azure SQL is like a PaaS, platform as a service, meaning you don't have to install things yourself, you don't have to update yourself, you don't have to manage yourself, right? Infrastructure management is taken away, and only administrative tasks are under your control. Maintaining a server, running it. When I say server, I'm talking about the SQL server, software side of things, not the IT side of server. So again, I'll be talking about that in the demo itself. So what I'll do is, I'll give you a small example, and I would like you to try to follow me as well. Now when I say try to follow me, you do not have to do it on Azure yourself. So what I've done is I've created a simple demo. It's a workshop, and if you want, I can also list it out in detail how you can also do it back home. So what I've done is I've set up two. Sorry.
We have a coding bootcamp.
Yeah.
That can be done.
Definitely. So what I've done is I've set up two app services, right? One is in South India, which is our region, and one is in Southeast Asia, which is Singapore, physically speaking. Two regions, they both run the same web page or the website. So I'll give you a glimpse of what it does, right? So say for example, I will go to, let me go to this one, Southeast Asia.
Can you please maximize the little
Sure,
bit?
sure. So say for example, I am on this website. You may not put in this website right now. I'll give you a link which you should try on your phone or your laptop, but after a while, okay? So as you can see, this is a web page, a simple web page. Nothing fancy, no orders, nothing, just a page. The only differentiator is that it has a welcome message. Yes or no?
Yes.
So what does it say right now?
South Asia.
Because it is being hosted in Southeast Asia, right? I also have a service, a similar service, or rather the same service, which I have hosted in South India. And just for your awareness, I'll also open the same. So you can notice that it's a different link. You also notice it says something else. Yes or no? Right? So what you can see is it says 403. That's because I have intentionally turned it off. It's not serving traffic right now. It is not ready to serve requests. It is offline, in simple words. So as you can see, it's currently offline. I'll click start. You can see it in the top left side. I'll just take a minute, let it start, show you what the web page is. then I'll give you a link, and you'll have to visit that link on your phone or laptop, however you want.
लिंक का क्यूआर कोड है?
नहीं, मैं बिटली बना सकता हूँ.
हाँ, बिटली भी क्यूआर हो सकता है.
हाँ, मतलब बना के. Okay,
You
so
put the QR code on top.
yeah. So what you see is it is still saying offline, right? I'll refresh. It is still processing, by the way. And also, just for your awareness, this app service is a Linux environment. So the server, in simple words, runs a Ubuntu machine. The code is written in ASP.NET Core. It's hosted on a GitHub repository, and there is an automatic pipeline that pushes or CI/CD setup so that it automatically updates the whole system. I mean, it's a larger demo, but it is, I've tuned it down just to focusing on the service part. Okay. Okay. A while. You might have noticed it did take some time to turn on. Yes or no?
Yes.
The startup was a bit time taking. The reason is because compared to a Windows environment, a Linux environment is not directly acting as a host OS. The bundles are offered as a containerized modules. So what happens is if you restart or if you stop and start, it will also pull the new containerized image because your software or ASP.NET web app in this case is packaged together, downloaded from the source, and then it's hosted as an environment, basically, right? So what do you notice here in this case?
Something new.
What does the welcome message say?
Something new.
Okay. I will go to a different tab. Let's say I'll close this to avoid confusion. I'll refresh. So just for your confidence, this says API. I mean, originally it was hosting API, that's why it says API. So API C, Southeast Asia, and here it says SI, South India. Clear so far?
Yes.
All good? Okay. Now, what I do is I'll create a bit.ly link for, let's say, the traffic manager URL. Okay, you can, I'll just put the link in a editor as well. Just a second. Sorry, 1 minute.
Yeah, use a mobile. Google Lens, Office Lens. I don't know, iPhone में क्या है?
नहीं, वो तो नॉर्मल कैमरा में ही है. नहीं, वो सर्टिफिकेट के लिए आएगा. आप कंटिन्यू. हाँ, by the way, because it's hosted as without a SSL certificate, so it's a cert error. You can continue. If you click more or advanced, you can skip the verification. But it's only for demos. I did not spend for the certificate. आ रहा है. नहीं आ रहा?
So can you
Yeah.
Zoom the QR code. 1 second.
I think so because you're in the वो angle पे नहीं दिख रहा है.
नहीं, मैं एक बार. हाँ,
ये
अब
angle.
दिखेगा? Oh, 1 second. Yeah. इधर आ जाइए, कोई बात नहीं तो आप आगे ही आ जाइए.
आप पीयूष इतना कोची में बैठे हैं, आए ना जगह पे.
Okay, everybody's with me?
Yeah.
Okay. How many of you see the welcome messages, welcome from South India? How many of you see message which says welcome from Southeast Asia? Anybody? Everybody says South India, yes or no? Okay. Now as you can imagine, this is the same setup that I was showing in the diagram. But in this case, I'm using the service called Traffic Manager, right? So the Traffic Manager is a DNS level load balancer. It automatically decides, and there is an algorithm, or you can set the settings that how you want to prioritize the traffic. One option is you can set it by priority. As the word applies, you can say order by 1, 2, 3 and so on. So if you say order 1, the service will do its best to always serve traffic from priority services level 1. If you set, let's say, a service which may be in the same data center, but if you set it as, let's say, service priority 2, it will serve traffic only if the first service is either taking time out or it's not able to serve, etc. Right? So for now, everybody is on their phone and seeing something. South India, right? Okay. What I will like to simulate is, which I already did before, but still I like to simulate with you guys. Now imagine that my services are affected in South India, either because there is a lot of timeout because of a poor logic in code. With all web applications, there is something called as a timeout, yes or no?
Yes.
Right? Depending upon the framework or your configuration, the timeouts can differ. Right? For some apps, it is less than a few seconds. For some apps, it is acceptable up to a few, let's say 10-20 seconds also. It depends. Correct? So, what I'm going to do now is, imagine that the server is not available to serve requests. So what I'll do is, to simulate, I already started the service in front of you. So I'm on the service for South India. All of you saw the, which website?
South India.
Right? What I will do is, I'll stop it. Currently the site is offline. It takes a while before it stops really responding. Now if you try to refresh the same link, it either might fail or either might take time. It depends. It's a DNS level thing. So depending upon your internet provider, I hope you understand the concept.
Yes.
I hope you also tweeted it because it's a really tweetable content.
Yeah.
Will do it.
Everybody's with me?
Yes.
So I'll try to refresh the link which I opened only for South India, just to prove the idea that it's really offline. It is offline, right? But if I use the link that I was showing or sharing with you initially, I'll say, let's say, go to this link. Of course, there is a certificate warning, but if I continue, is it the same for you guys as well?
Yes.
It feels like magic, yes or no? No?
Yes.
Almost.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to show is that with simple options or simple services that are offered in Azure, you can also offer the same experience to your customers. So if you understand, imagine you are my customer of my platform. For any reason, one of my servers is offline. But as a visitor, you will not see the interruption. Why? Because I'm still serving you the content successfully. I hope you agree to that, yes or no? Right? But still, this was a still of a quick glimpse that, okay, I turn off the service, it will automatically react and so on. But that is mainly unavailability of a server or a service. But how will you monitor or know what's happening, right? So I'll bring your attention to the Azure portal itself. So imagine that, let's say for example, let's say go to Southeast Asia. Now normally you may notice, I hope it's readable for all of you.
Yes.
May not be very clear, but still readable, yes or no?
Yes.
Right? So, what I want you to pay attention to is that as I was mentioning in my slides, you can set up alerts. So you can tell the system to alert you that, hey, the service is taking more consumption or things like that, right? So say for example, I want to apply something called as auto scale. So if there are a lot of visitors, a lot of traffic, or if there is a lot of demand on my server, I want to make sure that my server can copy itself or scale out and have ability to serve as much traffic as possible, right? But see, adding more servers is not the solution always. Why? Because more servers you add, the more cost your company has to pay. Yes or no? So just because you have a tool which you click and then obviously you have 10 servers does not mean that you are doing good job. Yes or no? It might be a solution temporarily. For that 1 hour, for maybe one day, it's okay. But anything more than that, it might be, a big problem for your business. Yes or no? Right? I have had customers where they were spending more than $40,000 a month. But just because they were able to afford it, they were not paying attention to that. So what we told them is, hey, we evaluated their posture, the infrastructure posture. We advised them, see, you don't need all this always online or always up and running this many services, because you don't have to serve this many servers, right? So anyway, so let's say I'll quickly walk you through this. So say for example, this is something called as an app service plan, and in a moment you'll notice some metrics. So you can notice the left hand side says CPU percentage, the one in the middle says memory consumption, and so on, right? So say for example, if I click on CPU percentage, I can understand or analyze, hey, this is my usage pattern. It depends. This is in last 1 hour. Let's say if I do last 24 hours, do you notice difference?
Yes.
Yes or no?
Yes.
The one that you were seeing before was for a granularity of just 1 hour, right? Not much difference. But if I try to observe as a programmer, IT manager, whatever, I can understand that, okay, there is some period during which my server needs more demand or has to serve more demand. It may be, this is a simulated traffic, but in your case, it might be an actual traffic. And that might help you understand, okay, during midnight hours, maybe the orders are more. So maybe we should set the settings such a way that in a certain time or day, we should automatically scale and then scale down, etc. So say for example, if I go here, back to the app service plan. So I've clicked a menu called alerts. It's on the left hand side. I can say alert rules. I already created a rule, so I'll just try to see if it's there or not. Yeah, okay, it's outside here. So what this rule tells me is, let me edit it here. Okay, and I'll jump in here as well. So what this rule setting tells me is, if you may read the condition, what does it say? A certain metric. I'm telling the system that, hey, if my CPU usage is beyond a certain demand, let's say in this case I'm using 15%, in an actual production system you are worried about if anything is more than 70-80%, because you want to actually know, okay, if it's more in demand, we want to act on it, right? For simulation, I have set it to 15%, right? What I've told the system in that case is, hey, if this happens, I'm saying do something about it. So for example, this is just the condition settings that, okay, if something happens, this is just the condition part, and then the action is here. In this case, I'm asking it to send me an email. So say for example, if I click on edit, you can notice that I can also ask it to send me an SMS, right? It depends how you want to be notified. So in my case, I've asked it to configure and send me an email with some details that, okay, your server is beyond capacity, etc. Now, what will you do about it? Just getting SMS is not going to fix your service, right? You want to make sure that there is some way of automatically taking over the problem, right? So in that case, you will have to set up something called as auto scale. So say for example, I'm back into the same app service plan. You can notice by the name here, it's the Southeast Asia. It's a Linux plan from the Penguin logo as well. right? And there are two options you have, right? So let's say scale up. So scale up is nothing but increasing the throughput of the same machine. So as in the previous example I was saying, from 8 GB to 16 GB. That is scale up, meaning you are increasing the resources of the same box. Okay? But that may not be the best option because you don't want a larger capacity run. It's like this. Just because you want to go to airport, you may not need a Mercedes. You can still do it in Wagoner. I hope you're able to understand the analogy.
Yes.
The same goes for a business in this case. Just because you have an option to select and save and simply solve it for that moment may not be the best idea for your business, right? So you may want to have some better options. So then comes in the picture of auto scale. And again, depends on your workload. So if your workload really demands more memory all the time, you may want a larger capacity virtual machine. You may notice my virtual machine that I'm using for demo has a RAM of 1.75 GB, a small machine, right? But depending upon your use case, you may have a larger machine or a smaller machine. And in my case, I'll say, let's say scale out. I'll wait for the settings. And let's say I'll say rule base say scale. Okay. So I have a scale setting you can see for yourself. So there are two things I have configured. The line above it says scale out. It says if the demand is of the CPU is more than 30%, I want to add more instances, one instance at a time. So say for example, by default I want to run only one instance. In simple words, only one server. If the demand is more, add more server by count of 1. If for both servers, again the capacity is higher or staying more than 30%, add the third server and so on. But when it cools down, I also want to make sure that I turn them off automatically, right? So the scale in, if you may notice, greater than 15, meaning I'm looking at the values and setting the metrics, basically. And you can notice the settings also. What is the minimum count of my instance? 1. Obviously you need to have 1, there is no other option. You cannot set to 0, right? Maximum, I'm telling the system, hey, scale to maximum 4 instances because that's my budget. I hope you understand, right? Because if I set a value of 10, it will scale to 10. Which again, the idea is that we don't want to buy a Mercedes just because you can afford it. For example, let's say tomorrow if you win 1 crore lottery, I hope so. The first thing you'll do is buy a Mercedes. She's nodding yes. That's good. But after buying 70 lakhs worth of car, what will you do? It may not be the best decision. That's what I'm trying to emphasize on. So you have to really be careful about the settings and the configurations of your servers, right? So hence, these settings are important. And of course, default is 1. That means, hey, please always maintain a count of 1. And depending on the scale, for example, if I click here, I can again change the settings. Let's say I can say, hey, for example, let's say if I say, just for demo, I change it a lower value 10. Because if I currently save this and try to hit the traffic, it will send me an email. So I just want to simulate that it actually works. And it will also increase the scale, right? So I'll just save this or update this. And of course, you can notice that I've selected the condition that increase the count by 1. Cooldown is 5 minutes, meaning it will wait for, between 2 service requests, it will wait for 5 minutes to monitor if there is a change or not, okay? So it may be a larger value, but in my case, because we want to reflect immediately, I'm using this value. I'll click on update. I'll click save. Now remember, this is done only for one service, which is in Southeast Asia. You will have to repeat these actions for all the services that you may have. So if I have, let's say in South India, I need to repeat the same configuration in South India as well. Or I should. I may not, but I should copy the same settings in that case as well. Okay. So say for example, I already applied the settings. Okay. And I'll try to, so what I want you to do is I want you to visit the link again, maybe refresh it 2-3 times. And then I will, let's say I'll just And what I've done is I've used Easter egg kind of a concept. In my app, I've introduced a query parameter chaos equals to a value. So it will simulate fake memory leaks. It will basically spin up multiple threads to simulate that it is taking pressure on the system. So say for example, I'll say 1000. So in theory, it will delay the thread by 1 second up to 10 times, and it will basically fake a simulation. So let's say if I have the settings done correctly, I'm opening my email, it's live in front of you, I'm not having this email pre-sent to me. So let's say so I got an email that my scale changes. What is my new capacity of my service now?
3.
From
2.
right. So it's working or not? Yeah. Interesting so far? I'll just talk about something called as load testing. So what I was trying to show you till now is what you should be doing with app service, or how you should configure auto scale and things like that. But then there are obviously, see, setting these settings is not enough. You'll be like, "Arey yaar, itna sab to humne kar diya, ab to chalna chahiye na." It's not going to work just like that, right? Because it might be a human problem, right? When I say human problem, errors introduced due to software bugs. Let's say your SQL logic is bad. The library that you're using on your website, let's say you're using Angular, Node.js. With open source libraries, normally these are challenges, right? That they generally try to consume memory more. Why? Because the person who wrote the library may not have optimized it for memory. Especially if you're processing QR codes, memory, or high volume data, charts, graphs. You might have experienced some of those problems in the past. Yes or no, right? So it is inevitable. It is not that because mera setting sahi hai to lifetime app sahi chalega. You cannot be like that. What you have to do is you also have to anticipate that where is failing, why it's failing, etc. What we saw right now is what you can do to make sure if demand increases, what to do, or what to do in advance so that when a demand increase comes, your service can automatically take care of it. I hope you understand, right? But how will you anticipate that? See, I changed the scale. I tried to fake a traffic simulation, right? I asked you to refresh the request. I refreshed myself on the browser. So the system detected, okay, there is more demand, and it will send me an email, etc., etc. It will automatically change the scale. Wonderful, right? But that may not be that easy for your product or your service. Yes or no? So you may want a way to simulate in real time. So then comes something called as load testing service, right? You may want a tool or a system which lets you simulate what happens if my site will get 1000 users at the same time, concurrent users. What will happen if my site is processing more than 1 million queries at the same time, etc., etc. I hope you understand. You need to load test the system, yes or no? Some of you might have done that also in your work. You may not have done it yourself, but that might be a QA team or some person doing it and telling you that, okay, this is slow, this is not good, etc., etc. Right? So in Azure, you have a built-in service called load testing service. So let's say I will go here. So I have a load testing service that I've already configured or set up, and I'll give you a very simple example what it does. So this is a built-in service offered by Azure itself. There are definitely other services in the market, but because you're already using Azure, you might want to use Azure's load testing itself. And when I say Azure's load testing service, it does not mean that you can test only Azure's services or services which are hosted in Azure. It can be any web app or web service, right? So say for example, if I go to my tests, I already did something in the past, last week precisely. So if I go to one of my tests, you can notice that, let's say I'll try to configure my test itself. is that I'm asking this service to hit a particular endpoint. Let's say the domain is where the service is hosted. So in this case, this is a unique URL. It can be yourcompany.com or an IP address, anything that is available on the internet, right? If it's available on the internet, you can put it in the domain name section, right? What I've done is I've asked it to use a specific protocol, HTTP or HTTPS. Most of us will be using HTTPS, obviously. Threads per engine is nothing but how many users you want to simulate. So this represents I want to simulate 100 users trying to visit my website, right? Then what I want to do is I want to decide the ramp up time is nothing but the cooldown or cool in period, basically. This factor decides how many users will be sending the request to your website at the same time. Then you have duration in second, meaning for how long this test will run. So 120 seconds it will try to constantly send traffic to my URL, whatever I've configured. And then it will be the path optional. So normally you may have company.com and that's it. But in this case I want to, let's say, point it to a specific path, for example. So say for example I don't want to put anything, but you can notice that it requires a valid value. So in this case, if you are just at a root level, you can simply say a slash. If you have a specific URL or a route, you can type in the route, right? Now, just for example, you can also pass in, let's say, other parameters, let's say some client secrets or other kind of certificate values, because depending upon your web app configuration, you might want authorized access only, right? In that case, you can specify header with a default username, password, depends on your settings, right? So what I want to do is I'll apply that, and of course, under load, I can also decide how many instances will be talking. So let's say I'm simulating 2 machines, each containing 100 users. So in total, how many users capacity I am having? 200 users. So in return, this service will allow me to test, let's say, up to 200 users trying to visit my website. So say for example, I will currently just apply this to save the test. I'll just make sure that my service is available, otherwise it will start giving us some kind of an error. It is serving the same traffic. It was because the South India server is still offline, so it is always serving the traffic from Southeast Asia. So because my service is available, I was just trying to test it. I'll click run here in my load testing service, and I'll say run. So it will start ramping up. So while that starts, it takes up to a few seconds, maybe 5 seconds or less. So say for example, just to give you an idea what happened. So this is one of the test results from my testing before our demo, or rather last week. So this gives me, as a IT or a program manager or a product manager, it gives me the statistics to understand how my product operates under load. Because it's a fake simulation, the numbers are small. In a real world, it might be a much larger number. So what is my load? Meaning how many requests my system can handle. So it was able to handle almost 700 requests at the same time, right? How much duration it took? Almost a minute to serve all the requests. What was my response time? Now this is one of the key metrics for any web app or a product, right? The faster the response, the better for the user, yes or no?
Yes.
For example, how many of you have tried booking a ticket on IRCTC? 5 years ago. 5 years ago. 6 years ago. It was a very good experience, right? Especially if you are trying to book it in Tatkal. Yes or no? By the time you are trying to book, it's gone, right? Nowadays, I believe it's much better. Not at all.
तू कैसा है फ्लाइट से
Comedy is trying out
This is called privilege.
Comedy is trying out there also.
Right. And so you can notice that I intentionally asked it to test on a service which was not available. So all the services have failed. All the requests that it tried, all the 700 requests, it failed. But what was my response time? The throughput is very important for me again as a product manager or a product person. So what is my throughput here? Almost 11 requests per second. This is number of requests per second, right? So the reason I believe it's a good system because even though there were errors, my system was fast enough to return the error, because as a product person or as a software company, it is important for you to also return an error as soon as possible. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say, right? If a failure occurs, you have to tell the customer immediately. You cannot take the advantage of loading for 10 seconds and then saying, oh, sorry, order cannot be placed. Yes or no, right? So this allows me to simulate those kind of workloads, right? Okay, so I'll just jump to the conclusion now. But I hope you are able to collect some information from today's demo and the session, right? So the conclusion in theory is that you want to make sure that you set up monitoring via any service or tool that you have. Specifically, you want to make sure that you set up alerts via email or SMS so that you are alerted or informed in advance. You want to make sure that you set up auto scale. What I did, or what I was showing you as settings, was for app service, but it is the same option is available for a virtual machine as well. So even though our demo was very short, only on our app service, the same options are available for a virtual machine, which you can tune depending upon your requirement, right? And last but not the least, you want to make sure that you proactively use load testing. It may be any service, maybe not Azure, but any service, but make sure that you do it proactively so that you can decide what is working, what is not working, and accordingly you can upgrade your systems depending upon the settings required. All right. So that's it from me. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much. Thank you.